Welcome, curious minds, to another journey into the hidden corners of history you never knew existed. Tonight, we're diving into a world that's equal parts beauty, discipline, and mystery, the life of a geisha in Japan. A role often misunderstood and romanticized in the West. But before we begin, if you enjoy uncovering stories that challenge your imagination and expand your understanding of human history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join our community and let us know in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who is tuning in from across the globe. Now, picture yourself in the bustling streets of Edo centuries ago. The air is fragrant with incense and the smell of fresh rice from the market stalls. Merchants are shouting their prices. Wandering monks are threading their way between the crowds. And samurai pass with a quiet authority that commands attention. Life here is vibrant, chaotic, and layered with rules you don't yet understand. You are a young girl, only 6 years old, blissfully curious about the world around you, chasing insects, marveling at the wooden toys in the shops, and unaware that your destiny has already been decided. Your family has chosen for you a path that will shape your entire life. You are to become a geisha, trained in arts that balance elegance and subtle power, performance and emotional resilience. Today, you wear your finest kimono, vibrant and stiff, practically a miniature fortress of silk. But this is just the beginning. Soon, your days will start before the sun rises in one T-end until every detail of your posture, your movements, and even your expressions have been refined to near perfection. You will learn to move like a living painting, every gesture intentional, every glance calculated. The journey is not just physical, it's mental and emotional as well. You will master the art of conversation, learning to make men feel noticed while keeping your own thoughts and feelings carefully guarded. You will memorize poetry, perfect the intricate folds of a kimono, and endure hours in the sitsa position where your knees protest and your circulation tests your endurance. And yet, in this disciplined life, there is power, quiet influence, and a beauty that goes far beyond appearances. Throughout this story, you'll also glimpse the broader tapestry of human life across time and culture, from the formalized marriages of ancient civilizations to the imposing fortresses of medieval Europe, and finally, to the relentless, rugged survival of early American frontiers. Each tale carries lessons about discipline, resilience, and the human capacity to adapt, entertain, and endure. So, dim the lights, let your imagination wander, and settle in as we embark on this journey, from delicate silk and towering hairstyles to the icy winds of frontier life. As the sun rises over Edo, casting long golden streaks across narrow wooden streets and the bustling market stalls, your small feet, barely steady, take hesitant steps along the polished pathways of the city, oblivious to the magnitude of the life that awaits you. In this world, your choices as a girl are already sharply limited, not by your curiosity or imagination, but by centuries of social expectation, family decisions, and the rigid hierarchy of a society that values appearance, skill, and the subtle manipulation of human emotion as much as it does lineage or wealth. While other children might dream of exploring forests, chasing fireflies, or learning the secrets of carpentry from their fathers, you are guided, almost imperceptibly, into a future that has been mapped out for you long before you understood what ambition or desire even meant. The path laid before you is clear. It is both daunting and fascinating in equal measure. You will become a geisha, an artist whose life is a delicate balancing act of beauty, grace, and unspoken influence. A figure who must perform for strangers with the quiet precision of a master craftsman, while concealing every thought and feeling that might betray the strength and intelligence hidden beneath the painted face. Your education begins almost immediately, though it is not like the schooling other children receive. From the moment you step through the threshold of the Okiya, the geisha house, you are immersed in a world that moves according to its own rhythm, a rhythm dictated by ritual, observation, and the exacting demands of tradition. The first lessons are deceptively simple. Learning to walk in the narrow, elevated wooden sandals without tripping, holding your back straight when you kneel for hours in the scissor position, and understanding, even at 6 years old, that every gesture carries meaning far beyond its surface. You watch silently as older geisha move like flowing water across the tatami mats, noticing how the slightest tilt of the head or flick of a fan can communicate respect, amusement, or subtle disapproval. You begin to understand that your eyes are always watching, your mind always calculating, and that even in silence, you are absorbing lessons in power, patience, and the delicate dance of social interaction that will define your entire life. Over time, the training intensifies, layering discipline upon discipline until it becomes almost indistinguishable from life itself. You learn to manipulate the brush and ink, practicing calligraphy until each stroke of the character seems infused with intention, to memorize dozens of poems about rivers, blossoms, and unrequited longing, reciting them with a grace that makes the simplest verse feel like an echo of eternity, and to perform traditional dances with every movement measured to evoke elegance, not effort. It is a world where failure is rarely acknowledged, but always remembered, where even the smallest misstep, a trembling hand while serving tea, a misaligned fold in the kimono, a whispered mispronunciation can leave. The moment you cross the threshold into the Okiya, the geisha house, you are immediately enveloped by an atmosphere that is both comforting and forbidding, a space where every object, every sound, and every shadow seems to carry its own unspoken lesson. The walls, adorned with delicate paintings of blossoms and serene landscapes, seem almost alive, observing your movements with the silent patience of centuries of practice. Here, life is not measured by hours or minutes, but by the precision of gestures, the elegance of posture, and the refinement of every expression. And from the very first day, you are immersed in a rhythm that demands your complete attention and obedience. At 6 years old, you are still small enough to fit into the flowing, layered kimono without being overwhelmed by its weight, yet old enough to begin understanding that this is not play, not a simple game of imitation, but a training that will shape every aspect of your body, mind, and spirit for the decades to come. Your days start long before the sun rises, the soft glow of lanterns casting elongated shadows across the tatami floors as you rise with a sense of quiet purpose, learning immediately that every movement must be deliberate and every sound carefully modulated. You begin with the basics, seemingly simple but deceptively challenging, walking in narrow wooden sandals, holding your back and shoulders in perfect alignment, and learning the complex series of bows and gestures that convey respect, humility, and subtle authority simultaneously. Even as you carry out these physical tasks, your mind is being trained with equal intensity, absorbing lessons in observation, emotional restraint, and social nuance that would overwhelm a less disciplined child. You are learning, almost unconsciously at first, how to notice the shift of a patron's gaze, the slight hesitation in a client's hand, or the quiet tension in a room, and to respond with grace and composure that hides both effort and awareness, transforming every interaction into a carefully choreographed dance of social intelligence. Meals, rest, and study are all structured with meticulous care. Every hour a portion to mastering one element of the geisha's art. You practice calligraphy until the brush feels like an extension of your arm. Repeat poems until each line rises naturally from your memory, and rehearse traditional dances until, as your days in the Okiya unfold, education becomes an all-encompassing experience that stretches far beyond the walls of formal instruction, weaving itself into every breath, movement, and glance you make, until the act of learning and the act of living are almost indistinguishable from one another. Mastery of posture is perhaps the most immediate and constant demand, for for it is the silent language that announces your presence even before a word is spoken. You kneel in sesa, legs folded neatly beneath you, your spine straight as bamboo, shoulders relaxed but aligned, eyes lowered in deference, yet alert to every motion in the room. And you endure the slow rebellion of your limbs, the tingling of your circulation, and the aching persistence of muscles not yet accustomed to such discipline. Understanding that perfection in posture is not merely aesthetic, but a vessel for grace, control, and silent authority. Etiquette becomes second nature as you learn to navigate its complex social rituals with the precision of a musician interpreting a symphony. Every bow, every exchange of tea, every glance at a client is imbued with subtle meaning, each gesture an exercise in tact and influence, teaching you the power of nuance and the art of saying much without uttering a single word. You learn, through careful observation, that the world outside the Okiya's sliding doors is as much a classroom as the rooms within. The way patrons move, the slightest twitch of an eyebrow, the inflection of a voice, these signals must be noticed, interpreted, and responded to with the perfect balance of charm, attentiveness, and discretion. Alongside these intangible lessons, the rhythm of daily chores grounds you in humility and the meticulous attention to detail that defines a geisha's life. Sweeping the tatami floors is not a mere task, but a meditation in precision. Each stroke of the broom drawing attention to your stance, your alignment, and the fluidity of your motions, while preparing tea becomes a sacred ritual. Dance of hands and vessels in which timing, temperature, canned presentation converge to create a moment of beauty and reverence. Even the simplest errands, fetching slippers, polishing lacquerware, adjusting kimono folds, require the same deliberate care, teaching you that grace lies not in grand gestures alone, but in the quiet perfection of small acts performed with mindfulness and artistry. Traditional arts, from calligraphy and poetry to dance and music, form the core of your formal instruction. Yet they are inseparable from the lessons embedded in your daily life. Each movement is repeated until it flows from the body without thought, each verse memorized until it emerges naturally, each note played until it resonates, not only in the room, but within your own understanding of timing, harmony, and emotional nuance. Observation remains paramount, for it is through attentive watching that you learn not only the desires of clients, but as the weeks turn into months within the quiet, lantern-lit halls of the Okiya. The lessons of physical and mental discipline grow ever more demanding, shaping not just your body, but the very essence of your awareness and endurance. At first, the scissor position feels almost impossibly unnatural. Your small legs folded beneath you on the tatami mats, as if trying to bend time itself into submission. Your knees whispering protests with every passing moment. Your toes and calves aching with a sharp, persistent reminder that this is only the beginning of a lifelong practice. The instructors, older geisha, whose movements seem to float across the room like water over stone, watch you silently, noting every tremor, every subtle misalignment, every faltering glance, and with gentle, unspoken authority, they guide you toward the quiet perfection that is expected. Sitting for hours is not a test of patience alone. It is an exercise in mastering the body's most subtle signals, transforming discomfort into composure, fatigue into a silent statement of resilience, attained into the foundation of elegance, teaching you to present a presence that is at once poised, unshakable, and attentive. As the days stretch long, you begin to realize that this physical endurance is inseparable from mental training. Each ache, each tingle of numbness in your legs and feet becomes a lesson in emotional control, a reminder that the mastery of self is the foundation of all artistry. You can learn to focus not on the pain, but on the way your spine aligns, the way your shoulders remain soft yet straight, the way your hands rest lightly on your lap, fingers curved just so, each movement purposeful and intentional. The process is relentless, testing not only the body, but the spirit, compelling you to confront discomfort without complaint, to transform instinctive reactions into deliberate, composed gestures, and to cultivate an inner calm that will carry you through every performance, every interaction, and every demanding moment in the presence of others. Beyond posture, the physical regimen extends 2 hours of practicing dance, learning the intricacies of precise footwork while balancing in narrow wooden sandals, and training the hands to pour tea, fold fans, and handle delicate musical instruments with the lightest, most controlled touch. Every movement is rehearsed until the body almost forgets the effort it requires, until skill becomes instinct, and until the geisha's grace appears effortless to any observer, concealing the years of repetition, discipline, and endurance required to achieve it. A mental fortitude is cultivated alongside this physical training, for the true geisha must remain vigilant, observant, and emotionally balanced at all times, able to respond to subtle cues, redirect conversations, and maintain composure in situations that would unravel those unprepared for the delicate equilibrium of social performance and personal restraint. By the time adolescence approaches, the child who entered the Okiya wide-eyed and curious has been transformed into, as your physical endurance and mental poise grow, another layer of discipline is added, one that transforms not just your body or mind, but your very appearance, turning you into a living embodiment of artistry and tradition. The kimono you wear is far more than a garment. It is a carefully structured canvas, each fold, layer, and sash chosen not only for its color or pattern, but for the statement it conveys about status, skill, and refinement. The obi, a long, heavy sash, intricately tied, drapes behind you like a river of silk, demanding precise positioning with each movement. A slight misalignment, potentially betraying a lack of care or understanding of centuries-old customs. Every kimono, from the simplest practice layers to the most elaborate attire reserved for performances or entertaining patrons, requires painstaking maintenance, careful folding, and an almost meditative attention to detail, still in the habit of precision that permeates every aspect of life within the Okiya. Equally demanding, if not more so, is the maintenance of the hair, especially the iconic Nihongami style, a towering arrangement of coils, loops, and ornaments that takes hours to construct and requires almost daily attention to remain pristine. Each comb, each decorative accessory must be placed with absolute care, for even the slightest misplacement can compromise the harmony of the style, immediately signaling inexperience or carelessness to the observant eye. You learn to sit still for long periods while senior geisha or hairdressers work meticulously, balancing patience with stillness as the elaborate structures of the hairstyle gradually rise and take form, becoming both crown and symbol of your dedication, endurance, and emerging artistry. Sleeping, which once might have offered rest and freedom, becomes another act of discipline entirely dictated by the preservation of appearance. The takamakura, a rigid wooden neck support, becomes your nightly companion, elevating your head carefully to prevent the hairstyle from collapsing under its own weight. The first nights are agonizing, your neck aching, your back stiff, yet slowly, most imperceptibly, your body adapts, learning to find comfort within constraint, discovering that the true art of a geisha extends even into the hours of sleep, where endurance and presentation intertwine. This constant awareness, this blending of necessity and aesthetic, begins to shape a new understanding of, even as your body has been meticulously trained to endure discomfort, and your appearance perfected to radiate elegance. The most subtle, most demanding lessons of the Okiya are the ones that shape the mind and heart, though they often leave no visible mark. Emotional discipline, the quiet mastery of one's own feelings while interpreting and guiding the emotions of others, becomes the cornerstone of your education, transforming interactions into a complex dance of perception, patience, and controlled response. From the moment you enter a room filled with clients, patrons, or visiting dignitaries, you are acutely aware that every word, every glance, every fleeting smile carries weight, and that your role is not merely to entertain, but to observe, redirect, and influence without ever appearing to do so. You learn, almost imperceptibly at first, that composure under pressure is a form of power, that patience is a weapon, and that silence, wielded with intention, often speaks louder than the most ornate expression. First, the lessons are humbling and disorienting. A client may arrive in a sour mood, or speak with impatience, or attempt to assert authority through tone or gesture, and you are expected to respond with warmth, tact, and poise, neither revealing frustration nor overextending familiarity. Conversations are subtly guided, topics redirected with soft humor or gentle observation, flattery administered with artful restraint, and attention given to those who require it, while maintaining an invisible boundary that preserves your autonomy and inner calm. It is a constant exercise in reading nuance, a shift of posture, a twitch of a lip, a half-hidden frown all become signals that must be noticed, interpreted, and addressed with elegance. Over time, you develop an instinctive understanding of social dynamics, a fluency in the language of subtle influence that allows you to navigate even the most delicate situations without overt confrontation. It's relying instead on the quiet power of grace, empathy, and emotional regulation. The emotional labor extends beyond simple interaction with clients. You also observe and navigate the complex relationships within the Okiya itself, between older geisha, peers, and apprentices. Learning to manage envy, competition, and hierarchy with diplomacy and discretion. Every smile, every nod, every carefully chosen phrase is calibrated to maintain harmony while asserting skill, building reputation, and safeguarding your place within the intricate social web of the house. You internalize the truth that influence is not demanded. It is earned through attentiveness, subtlety, and the careful cultivation of trust, admiration, and respect, and that the most effective guidance is often the quietest, delivered with minimal words but maximum impact. By adolescence, this emotional discipline has become second nature. You can soothe tension without appearing to intervene, deflect attention without creating offense, and shape the flow of conversation while remaining outwardly calm and cheerful. A living example of composure and intelligence. It is here, in these delicate acts of subtlety and emotional mastery, that the true artistry of a geisha emerges, not in the visible beauty of kimono or hairstyle, not in the memorization of poetry or dance steps, but in the ability to command presence, inspire trust, and wield influence through empathy, observation, and self-control. In mastering emotional labor, as the years unfold within the quiet, lantern-lit chambers of the Okiya, your education expands beyond the mastery of posture, appearance, to peerance into the rich and intricate world of cultural expertise, a domain where the arts, intellect, and tradition converge to shape you into a living embodiment of refinement and sophistication. Dance becomes not merely a series of steps, but a language, each movement an eloquent phrase capable of conveying grace, emotion, and subtle narrative without a single word being spoken, and you practice relentlessly, repeating motions until the sway of your hands, the turn of your feet, and the gentle tilt of your head flow with the natural elegance of water tracing a riverbed, so that every performance becomes both an act of beauty and a display of precise discipline honed over countless hours. Music, too, becomes an intimate extension of your presence. She learned the delicate tones of instruments like the shamisen, the koto, or the flute, practicing each note until it resonates not only in the air, but within your understanding of timing, harmony, and emotional nuance, allowing you to create moments of quiet enchantment that linger long after the strings have ceased to vibrate. Poetry, memorization, and literary knowledge are central pillars of this cultural education. You are tasked with internalizing hundreds of classical verses, learning not merely their words, but their cadence, rhythm, and the subtle emotions they encode. so that when a client remarks on the beauty of the moon, the transience of cherry blossoms, or the elegance of the seasons, you can respond with a quotation that evokes refinement and intellect, all while maintaining the soft composure and grace expected of a geisha. These poems, drawn from centuries of literary tradition, become both tools and shields, allowing you to participate in conversation with erudition, elegance, and subtle influence, guiding dialogue with artistry rather than force, and offering moments of insight or amusement that reveal your cultural depth, without ever compromising the controlled aura of composure that defines your presence. Every ritual and custom practiced within the Okiya, from the precise pouring of tea to the formal arrangement of flowers or the ceremonial performance of seasonal dances, is imbued with layers of meaning, and you are taught to execute each act with both technical precision and reverent understanding. For a misstep is not merely a mistake in form, but a disruption of cultural continuity. The repetition of these rituals instills in you patience, observation, and a profound respect for tradition, teaching you that mastery of form carries with it both responsibility and power, and that the true art of a geisha lies in seamlessly blending skill, presence, and cultural knowledge into a performance that is as intellectually compelling as it is visually captivating. Through this immersion in the arts, you gradually understand that your value as a geisha does not reside simply in beauty or charm, but in the careful cultivation of mind, body, and spirit into a harmonious whole capable of inspiring admiration, reflection, and subtle influence. You become a steward of culture, a performer who can navigate the complexities of human interaction, the shifting currents of social expectation, and the weight of centuries-old tradition with a combination of intellect, elegance, and empathy. And in doing so, you realize that every dance, every note, every poem, as your mastery of the cultural arts deepens, you begin to confront one of the most delicate and essential aspects of the geisha, its education, the art of balancing admiration with distance, cultivating an aura of elegance and restraint that transforms attention into quiet power. In every interaction, whether with clients, patrons, or fellow geisha, you are trained to project warmth without over-familiarity, charm without dependency, and presence without intrusion, a subtle equilibrium that requires both intuition and conscious control. From the moment you enter a room, you are acutely aware of the dual responsibilities that accompany your role to captivate and engage, drawing the admiration of those around you, while simultaneously preserving a space between yourself and the world that maintains your autonomy, your dignity, and the mystery that defines the geisha's allure. Every glance, every tilt of the head, every carefully measured smile becomes a form of communication that conveys grace, intellect, and discernment, allowing you to command attention without ever raising your voice or asserting dominance in a conventional sense. The delicate tension between intimacy and distance requires constant attention. For the smallest miscalculation, a lingering gaze, a gesture too bold, or a comment too personal can dissolve the carefully constructed impression that took years of training to achieve. You learn to read subtle cues with the precision of a master observer, noting shifts in posture, inflections in tone, and the unspoken needs of those in your presence. Then respond with actions that satisfy curiosity and admiration without revealing your full self. In this way, you become an architect of perception, shaping how others experience your presence while preserving a core of mystery and control that is entirely your own. The ability to withhold, to imply rather than declare, to redirect attention with elegance rather than confrontation becomes a quiet but formidable power. One that allows you to navigate the complexities of social interaction with a combination of grace, wit, and strategic subtlety that few could ever perceive or counter. This equilibrium is reinforced by years of practice and repetition, internalizing a rhythm that blends observation, timing, and performance into an almost instinctive skill You learn that the most effective influence often occurs in moments that seem effortless. A soft nod that acknowledges understanding, a tilt of the fan that signals approval, a carefully chosen phrase that redirects conversation while appearing spontaneous. In these actions, the geisha becomes both participant and conductor, guiding social currents without ever appearing to do so, creating a space in which admiration flows naturally, curiosity is piqued, and respect is earned through subtle artistry rather than force. Ultimately, the cultivation of elegance and restraint is more than a strategy for social interaction. It is a reflection of mastery over self and circumstance. By maintaining composure and mystery, you preserve your. As the years pass and your presence within the Okiya matures, a subtle but profound transformation occurs. The student becomes the teacher, the novice becomes the steward of tradition, and the once anxious apprentice emerges as a figure whose very movements carry authority, elegance, and cultivated influence. Mentorship becomes both responsibility and honor, as you are entrusted with guiding younger apprentices through the rigorous path you once navigated yourself, instilling in them the same lessons of discipline, composure, and artistry that took you years to master. The process is delicate, requiring patience, empathy, and subtle correction. For each young geisha in training arrives with her own temperament, strengths, and vulnerabilities, and it is your task to nurture these qualities while shaping them to meet the standards of excellence that define the household and the broader tradition. Through this mentoring, you begin to appreciate the cyclical nature of the Okiya, understanding that your role extends beyond personal mastery into the cultivation of the next generation, a responsibility that carries both pride and weight. With this advancement comes a marked increase in responsibility, as you are called upon to perform at more prominent events, entertain high-ranking clients, and represent the Okiya in social circles that demand refinement, discretion, and cultural expertise. Every performance, whether a carefully choreographed dance, the delicate handling of musical instruments, or the nuanced delivery of poetry and conversation, becomes an opportunity to demonstrate not just skill, but the culmination of years of training in posture, etiquette, and emotional discipline. Your public persona is carefully refined, a living embodiment of elegance, charm, and subtle authority. Each gesture, glance, and expression calibrated to convey confidence without arrogance, approachability without overfamiliarity, and grace without effort, reinforcing the mystique that has been cultivated since your earliest days in the Okiya. The social and cultural expectations grow more complex as you navigate relationships with peers, clients, and the wider community of connoisseurs and patrons who appreciate both your artistry and your presence. You are expected to maintain composure in demanding circumstances, to anticipate the needs of those around you, and to handle delicate situations with discretion and tact, often relying on the emotional intelligence and subtle influence that has been honed over years of attentive observation and practice. At the same time, your mentoring responsibilities demand a careful balance, ensuring that your guidance uplifts and instructs without stifling individuality, teaching lessons through demonstration as much as through words, and fostering a sense of respect, loyalty, and continuity within the household. By this stage, the geisha's career is no longer defined solely by personal growth, but by the enduring influence she exerts on both her environment and the people within it. The refinement of your public persona, the cultivation of your mentees, and the management of social and cultural expectations combine to create a role that is both highly visible and profoundly influential. A position of subtle power earned through years of discipline, amid the intricate balance of skill, mentorship, and public persona. One of the most consequential aspects of a geisha's career emerges in the form of sponsorships from patrons, known traditionally as dana, which provide not only financial stability, but also a layer of social protection that can shape the trajectory of a lifetime. These relationships, carefully cultivated and maintained, are built upon mutual respect, shared understanding of cultural rituals, and the recognition of artistry, subtlety, and emotional intelligence that define a geisha's presence. Dana is not merely a benefactor. Ki is a participant in an intricate dance of trust and discretion, offering resources, connections, and support in exchange for companionship and the refined performances that only a seasoned geisha can provide. Always within the boundaries of decorum and the traditions of the Okiya. The arrangement requires as much strategic thinking and social insight as any public performance. For the manner in which one engages with a patron can strengthen a geisha's reputation, elevate her social standing, and secure privileges that allow for a degree of autonomy and security otherwise unavailable within the demanding structure of the house. The patronage relationship is a subtle negotiation of expectations, desires, and decorum, and mastering it is an extension of the lessons learned through years of emotional discipline and cultural expertise. Every interaction with the Dana is layered with intention, a measured smile, a precise cadence of conversation, the choice of poem or musical piece, and even the smallest gestures of attentiveness all signal respect, skill, and understanding. The geisha learns to anticipate the needs and moods of her patron, to redirect attention gracefully when necessary, and to cultivate rapport that is both engaging and discreet, maintaining a balance that preserves the sanctity of personal boundaries while ensuring the relationship flourishes. It is here that the combination of poise, elegance, and subtle influence proves indispensable, transforming social and emotional acumen into tangible support that sustains the geisha through both routine obligations and unforeseen challenges. With a trusted Dana, a geisha may gain protection from social scrutiny, financial pressures, and even the unpredictable vicissitudes of life in Edo or Kyoto, allowing her to focus on refining her artistry and fulfilling her duties with a degree of confidence and stability that is otherwise rare in such a demanding vocation. The benefits extend beyond the immediate household, often influencing her standing within the larger cultural and social networks, where reputation, discretion, and the demonstration of skill and refinement determine opportunity and respect. For the geisha, these sponsorships are not taken lightly. They are cultivated with care, maintained with subtle diplomacy, and honored with the same dedication and precision as any performance, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between artistry, social intelligence, and long-term security. Ultimately, the presence of a Dana illuminates the delicate interweaving of art, culture, and strategy that defines a geisha's life. It demonstrates how mastery of emotional labor, cultural expertise, and social navigation coalesces into tangible outcomes, highlighting that behind the elegance and mystique of every performance lies a lifetime of preparation, discipline, and calculated engagement with the world. Sponsorships become both a shield and a tool, a testament to the geisha's ability to wield subtle influence and secure stability in a society even after the curtain falls on a geisha's public performances. When the lantern-lit halls grow quieter and the soft clatter of sandals on polished floors becomes less frequent, her influence does not simply vanish into memory. Instead, it reverberates through the generations that follow, woven into the very fabric of the Okiya and carried forward by the apprentices and younger geisha who have watched, learned, and absorbed her every gesture, smile, and carefully measured movement. Retirement does not signify the end of purpose, but rather a transformation of role. As the geisha's presence shifts from the visible stage to a more subtle, enduring position of mentorship, guidance, and cultural stewardship, ensuring that the techniques, rituals, and refined sensibilities she mastered over decades are preserved and perpetuated with reverence and fidelity. Every gesture once executed for a client, every nuanced expression of grace, and every lesson of emotional and cultural intelligence becomes a living legacy, transmitted through patient teaching, quiet example, and the stories passed down within the Okiya, so that the artistry of one lifetime continues to shape countless others long after the original performer has stepped back from the spotlight. The older geisha, though no longer performing with the same frequency, continues to influence the standards and expectations of the house, serving as a touchstone for excellence and a guardian of tradition. She observes the unfolding careers of younger geisha with keen insight, offering correction when necessary, but more often modeling composure, discretion, and the subtle interplay of admiration and distance that defines mastery. Her guidance reinforces lessons that cannot be fully captured in instruction alone, lessons of timing, empathy, elegance, and the silent power that flows from restrained hand. In doing so, she shapes not only the technical proficiency of her successors, but their understanding of the artistry and philosophy that underpin the entire vocation. In this way, the retired geisha's influence becomes both tangible and ethereal, a structural presence within the Okiya, yet also an almost invisible thread that binds the community together, a living testament to the enduring power of culture, tradition, and personal excellence. Through this process, the cycle of mentorship and performance continues. And the artistry of the geisha evolves while remaining anchored in the foundational practices and sensibilities of the past. Each new generation benefits from decades of accumulated wisdom, drawing upon the experiences, triumphs, and subtle strategies of those who came before them, ensuring that the elegance, emotional intelligence, and cultural mastery that defined the role are not diluted or forgotten, but rather refined, adapted, and elevated. The retired geisha, once the center of attention in candlelit gatherings and tea houses, now occupies a quieter but equally vital position as the custodian of legacy. Her influence extending beyond her own performances to shape the practices, perspectives, and artistry of countless others. And in doing so, she ensures that the enduring mystique and power of the geisha is not merely a relic of history, but a living, evolving tradition that continues to inspire admiration, respect, and cultural reverence across generations. As we step away from the refined, lantern-lit chambers of the geisha and travel back thousands of years into the sprawling cities and fertile valleys of ancient civilizations, we encounter a world where the bonds of marriage and social organization were governed far less by personal sentiment and far more by law, economics, and the structured expectations of society, illustrating a fascinating contrast to the personal artistry and subtle influence cultivated in the Okiya and Sumer. The cradle of civilization nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates. Marriage was formalized through written contracts, pressed into wet clay with precise marks that delineated responsibilities, property, and social obligations. These agreements were not tender expressions of romantic affection, but rather carefully negotiated arrangements designed to secure the economic stability of both families, ensure proper lineage, and maintain social order within a complex and often unpredictable society. Each party's contributions, whether land, livestock, or labor, were documented with exacting detail, reflecting a civilization that placed the functioning of society and the continuity of family lines above the whims of personal desire, and in which love, though occasionally present, was a secondary consideration. Meanwhile, in ancient Egypt, the intertwining of personal, social, and spiritual life manifested in marriage customs that blended legal formality with ritual symbolism. The Egyptians valued companionship and affection, sometimes expressed through poetry that captured the tender stirrings of the heart. Yet, the practical dimensions of marriage, household management, inheritance, and social duty remained paramount. Couples were often united under ceremonial observances that reflected cosmic order as much as personal commitment, and the roles of husband and wife were carefully prescribed. Women, particularly among the upper classes, were expected to manage domestic affairs, bear children, and maintain familial honor, while men provided protection, resources, and social standing. Even within these constraints, the Egyptians infused their unions with artistry. symbolism, and moments of personal expression, demonstrating that human connection and cultural refinement could coexist within the rigid frameworks of duty and law. In both Sumerian and Egyptian societies, marriage served as a structured foundation upon which the larger social and economic world rested. A binding contract that aligned personal lives with civic responsibility, spiritual belief, and family legacy. While modern observers might find these arrangements austere or impersonal, they reveal a sophisticated understanding of human organization and continuity, emphasizing the ways in which civilizations have historically balanced personal agency, societal expectation, and the practical necessities of life. Reading the clay tablets and deciphering the hieroglyphs, we see a world in which love was optional, yet commitment, strategy, and cultural observance were essential, providing a lens through which we can understand not only the personal experiences of those ancient individuals, but also the enduring human impulse to create order, cues, tradition, and navigate the complex interplay between personal desire and societal obligation. Through these glimpses into Sumerian and Egyptian practices, we begin to understand that the concept of partnership, whether in the form of marriage or mentorship, carries with it layers of cultural expectation, emotional labor, and strategic awareness, an echo, in some ways, of the subtle balance of influence, composure, and legacy cultivated by Geisha centuries later, reminding us that human ingenuity and social sophistication have long been entwined with the rituals, contracts, and formalities that define our collective history. In the bustling city-states of ancient Sumer, where ziggurats rose toward the heavens and the Euphrates and Tigris nourished fertile lands, marriage was far more than a private union. It was a carefully codified social contract, etched into clay tablets with painstaking precision to ensure the stability of the family and, by extension, the city itself. These contracts, often drafted and witnessed by scribes trained in the complexities of law, outlined in meticulous detail the property each partner brought into the union, the obligations they were expected to uphold, and the social duties required to maintain honor, lineage, and communal order. Land, livestock, jewelry, and even labor were itemized with exacting care, forming a blueprint for daily life that left little to chance and no room for ambiguity, reflecting a society in which personal desires were subordinate to the practical and legal imperatives that safeguarded both family and community. Within these tablets, one could find provisions specifying who would manage the household, how children's inheritances would be allocated, and the responsibilities of both husband and wife toward extended family and the city-state, creating a framework that was as much about social cohesion as it was about individual lives. The contracts served as both a shield and a guide. They protected women from arbitrary dispossession, delineated the husband's duties and rights, and established mechanisms for resolving disputes, ensuring that the union could function even amid the unpredictable currents of Sumerian urban life, where commerce, politics, terror, and religion intertwined in complex, often precarious ways. These agreements transformed marriage from a private, emotional endeavor into a cornerstone of societal stability, underscoring the profound understanding the Sumerians had of human behavior, social networks, and the interdependence of families within the broader civil structure. Yet, within this legalistic framework, we can also detect glimpses of human nuance, clauses that allowed for compensation in the event of separation, provisions for dowries that could elevate a family's social standing, and carefully articulated responsibilities that implicitly acknowledged the importance of respect, collaboration, and mutual care. While romance may have been considered incidental rather than essential, the Sumerians recognized that the success of the union relied not solely on obedience or obligation, but on the careful balancing of rights, duties, and social awareness, a recognition that human relationships, even when formalized by law, required a degree of emotional and practical intelligence to endure. Through these contracts, we see a civilization that approached marriage with both rigor and pragmatism, embedding within each clay tablet a roadmap for cooperation, hierarchy, and social continuity that would shape the lives of countless generations. The Sumerian approach reminds us that from the earliest days of urban society, humans have sought not only to navigate personal relationships, but also to harmonize them with the wider demands of culture, law, and community, crafting bonds that, while structured and codified, were intended to endure across both time and circumstance, anchoring the family as a central unit in the architecture of civilization itself. Moving from the clay tablets of Sumer to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, we find ourselves immersed in a civilization where the rhythm of the river mirrored the cycles of daily life, and where marriage, while similarly grounded in legal and societal obligations, allowed for a surprising appreciation of emotional connection, as glimpsed in the tender verses of Egyptian love poetry. In this world, unions were arranged with careful attention to family status, property, and social alignment, ensuring that households could function harmoniously within the complex hierarchies of city, state, and temple. Yet, beneath this structured framework, the Egyptians celebrated the small, intimate joys of human affection. Poems preserved on papyrus, inscribed on tombs, and woven into everyday ritual, capture the flutter of the heart at the sight of a beloved, the delight in a shared gaze, for the subtle thrill of being thought of and remembered, revealing a civilization that recognized the power of emotional resonance, even when the larger social and legal imperatives remained paramount. Marriage contracts defined roles and responsibilities, specifying duties in the management of the household, the upbringing of children, and the proper conduct in accordance with social expectations. But the poet's words hint at a softer, more human side to these obligations, suggesting that joy, desire, and connection were woven into the fabric of daily life when circumstances allowed. Lines such as, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of you," or "She has stolen my heart with her hair," illustrate a sensitivity to love and attraction that coexisted with the practicalities of property, inheritance, and family alliances. These expressions of affection were not merely ornamental. They reflected an understanding that emotional bonds, even within a legally structured marriage, contributed to household harmony, social cohesion, and the nurturing of familial continuity, blending personal sentiment with civic and spiritual responsibility in a delicate, culturally informed balance. The Egyptian approach to marriage, therefore, embodies a nuanced interplay between law and emotion, duty and desire, illustrating how society could codify expectations while still recognizing the enduring human need for connection and companionship. While romantic love was neither a prerequisite nor the guiding principle of marital arrangements, it was valued as a meaningful complement to the obligations dictated by society and the state, offering intimacy and pleasure within a framework that safeguarded both family and social order. In this way, we see a civilization that not only engineered the legal scaffolding of domestic life, but also honored the poetic, emotional dimensions that give those structures their vitality, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of how the heart and the law could coexist within the rhythms of daily life. By exploring the Egyptian perspective alongside the earlier Sumerian practices, we gain insight into a broader spectrum of human ingenuity in structuring marriage. From the rigid formalism and economic pragmatism of Mesopotamia, as we journey further through the tapestry of human civilization, we arrive in the carefully ordered world of traditional Japan, where marriage was far more than a personal union. It was a meticulously orchestrated ritual that intertwined familial duty, social hierarchy, and spiritual symbolism, reflecting a society in which the harmony of the household mirrored the harmony of the cosmos. From the moment a marriage was arranged, the participants and their families prepared for a series of ceremonial acts designed to formalize not only the union of two individuals, but also the alignment of two lineages, ensuring the continuity of honor, inheritance, and societal standing. The bride would often don the red garments of joy and luck, seated in a decorated sedan chair, her face partially veiled in deference to both family expectation and sacred tradition, and would travel through the streets in a procession that marked her transition from one household to another, accompanied by rituals that emphasized respect, order, and the symbolic unification of not only the couple, but also their ancestors and the divine forces believed to oversee human life. Each bow, each step, and each sip of ceremonial sake carried layers of meaning, binding the couple to obligations to their families, their community, and the cosmic order that underpinned daily existence, illustrating a worldview in which marriage was inseparable from social, spiritual, and cultural continuity. In this same exploration of martial and disciplined societies, the starkly contrasting traditions of ancient Sparta offer a compelling counterpoint, revealing how different cultural imperatives shaped the rites of union. Spartan marriages, while certainly embedded within social and familial expectations, were influenced by the city-state's obsession with military strength, civic duty, and population continuity, leading to practices that emphasized functional outcomes over emotional intimacy. Young women were often married in their early teens to men who were carefully selected based on their physical prowess, lineage, and potential to contribute to the strength of the polis, with ceremonies and customs that reinforced social cohesion and obedience to the state. The bride might be dressed in symbolic attire, prepared through ritual acts, and introduced into her husband's household with measured steps, designed to balance personal transition with the broader interests of the community, reflecting a philosophy in which the individual's role was inseparable from the collective well-being and the perpetuation of Spartan ideals. Despite the contrasting aesthetics, philosophies, and ritual structures, both Japanese and Spartan traditions share an underlying recognition of marriage as a conduit for social stability, lineage preservation, and cultural reinforcement, illustrating how ceremonies, symbolic gestures, and adherence to hierarchy serve as instruments for shaping human behavior across civilizations, whether through the delicate choreography of a Japanese wedding, steeped in elegance, symbolism, and ancestral homage, or through the austere and purposeful arrangements of a Spartan household designed to fortify a warrior society. Marriage emerges as a nexus where personal lives intersect with societal priorities, spiritual belief, and enduring cultural values. These practices reveal not only the diverse expressions of human ingenuity, but also the persistent human need in Spartan society, where the collective strength and survival of the city-state took precedence over individual desires. Marriage was far more than a personal milestone. It was a deliberate act of civic duty, meticulously designed to reinforce loyalty, social cohesion, and the perpetuation of a disciplined, warrior-focused culture. The unions were formalized through structured rites, symbolic gestures, and carefully orchestrated ceremonies that reinforced the expectations placed upon both husband and wife, ensuring that each partnership contributed directly to the stability and prosperity of the polis. For a Spartan bride, the transition into her husband's household was not merely a personal journey, but a public affirmation of her role within the broader network of family, community, and state, where obedience, fidelity, and contribution to communal life were inseparable from her identity. From the subtle choreography of ceremonial movements to the prescribed rituals that marked her passage from maidenhood to wifehood, every aspect of the marriage was imbued with meaning, designed to cultivate a sense of responsibility not only toward her spouse, but toward the extended family, the civic order, and the perpetuation of Spartan ideals across generations. Similarly, other ancient societies, from the tribal communities of the Celts to the structured civilizations of early India and the Mediterranean, code this emphasis on duty, loyalty, and communal ties, demonstrating that the formalization of marriage was rarely purely personal or romantic. Rituals, symbolic acts, and legal conventions serve to codify social hierarchies, align family interests, and ensure continuity of property. Lineage and spiritual or civic obligations, creating a web of interdependent relationships that tied the individual to the broader community in profound and enduring ways. In many cases, the ceremonies themselves were designed to teach, reinforce, and transmit these values. A shared cup of wine symbolized mutual commitment and familial bonds. Ceremonial bows and processions reinforced respect for hierarchy, and public acknowledgement ensured that both the couple and the community recognized the sacred, social, and legal dimensions of the union. Through these practices, we see that ancient societies understood marriage as a multi-layered institution, balancing personal responsibilities with societal expectations, and shaping behavior through ritual, tradition, and communal observation. It was through the careful weaving of symbolic acts, legal structures, and cultural norms that individuals internalized their roles, learned the delicate equilibrium of loyalty and duty, and contributed to the cohesion and survival of their communities. Even in societies as diverse as Spartan city-states, Celtic tribes, and early Indian kingdoms, the threads of obligation, honor, and interconnection were consistently woven into the institution of marriage, underscoring the universal human desire to anchor personal relationships within a framework that extends beyond the self, into the enduring fabric of society, tradition, and cultural legacy. Traveling westward from the disciplined Spartan city-states and the intricate ceremonial landscapes of Japan, we enter the dynamic and multifaceted worlds of ancient Rome, the Hebrew kingdoms, and the Celtic tribes, where the institution of marriage reveals a remarkable blend of legal flexibility, social expectation, and cultural symbolism, illustrating how human societies continuously sought to balance personal rights with communal order. In Roman society, marriage functioned as both a private arrangement and a public institution, one in which women, though often constrained by social norms, could exercise surprising degrees of agency. Under certain conditions, Roman women were permitted to own property independently, manage estates, and, importantly, initiate divorce. A legal flexibility that contrasted sharply with the rigidly codified unions of many other ancient civilizations. Yet, despite these legal allowances, the social realities of Roman life often imposed strict expectations. Marriages were frequently arranged to strengthen family alliances, secure wealth, or consolidate political influence, and women were expected to navigate these dynamics with grace, intelligence, and discretion. The duality of Roman marriage, the interplay between legal latitude and social obligations, required individuals to balance personal desire, familial duty, and civic responsibility, a delicate act of negotiation that shaped daily life, inheritance, and societal status for generations. Among the Hebrews, marriage carried both legal and sacred dimensions, merging social contract with spiritual covenant in a way that reflected the deeply communal and religious nature of their culture. Legal documentation, witness verification, and adherence to moral codes were essential components, ensuring that the union safeguarded property, familial honor, and the woman's security within the household, while simultaneously honoring the divine approval considered integral to the legitimacy of the bond. Women in Hebrew society were often protected by these contracts, which outlined dowries, rights, and obligations, providing a degree of stability and predictability in a world where social and economic forces could otherwise render them vulnerable. At the same time, marriages were not merely mechanical arrangements. Rituals, vows, and symbolic acts infused the union with meaning, embedding the couple's relationship within broader narratives of faith, family lineage, and communal identity, and reinforcing the notion that marriage, while legally binding, was inseparable from the spiritual and moral framework of society. Celtic societies offer yet another fascinating variation, where marriage was as much a communal, symbolic, and seasonal act as it was a legal or economic one. Among the Celts, unions were celebrated with elaborate rituals that tied the couple not only to each other, but also to their tribe, the natural world, and the cycles of the seasons, reinforcing communal bonds and ancestral continuity. Fidelity, lineage, and social responsibility were central. Yet, personal choice and mutual agreement often played a greater role than in many contemporary civilizations, reflecting a culture that valued flexibility, ritualized expression, and the integration of human relationships into the rhythms of life, land, and community. Marriage thus became both a deeply personal journey and a public affirmation of loyalty, social cohesion, and the perpetuation of cultural norms, demonstrating the myriad ways in which human societies across Europe and the Mediterranean approach the complex interplay of law, love, duty, and social expectation. Across these three systems, Romans, Hebrew, and Celtic, we witness a recurring tension and harmony between legal flexibility, social constraints, and cultural symbolism, illustrating that even within diverse civilizations, marriage functioned as a nexus where personal agency, societal stability, and cultural continuity intersected. From property rights to ritual observance, from contractual obligations to poetic expressions of love and fidelity. These societies, in ancient Hebrew society, marriage was a carefully balanced fusion of the sacred and the contractual, a union in which divine sanction and human law intertwined to create a bond that was simultaneously spiritual, social, and legal, reflecting a worldview in which every personal relationship was inseparable from communal and religious responsibility. From the earliest stages, the union was planned with deliberate attention to both familial and spiritual considerations, ensuring that the marriage aligned with broader moral and societal codes, of protecting the rights and well-being of both parties, particularly the bride, whose security within her new household was of paramount importance. Legal instruments, such as ketubas, formal written agreements, meticulously outlined the obligations of the husband toward his wife, including financial support, protection, and recognition of her social and personal rights, while simultaneously affirming her commitment to household duties. Family continuity and the moral frameworks established by religious law. The ceremonial dimension of Hebrew marriage further emphasized the intertwining of divine approval and legal recognition. Rituals were performed in the presence of witnesses, invoking blessings, prayers, and symbolic acts that not only celebrated the union, but also consecrated it under divine observation, signaling that the marriage was both a human contract and a covenant before God. Drinking from shared cups, exchanging vows, and bowing in ritualized gestures communicated respect, submission to divine order, an acknowledgement of the responsibilities the couple assumed, embedding every personal action within a cosmic and social context. Even amid these structured practices, there was room for emotional connection, tenderness, and mutual respect, as suggested in poetic texts and cultural narratives that celebrated affection, loyalty, and partnership, demonstrating that while legal and religious frameworks shaped the marriage, human emotions were not entirely absent from the equation. By combining strict legal protections with religious approval, Hebrew marriages created a dual system in which the well-being of individuals, the stability of families, and the moral integrity of society were all interdependent, causing that love and duty, personal desire, and societal obligation could coexist within a single, deeply meaningful institution. This careful calibration of legal structure and sacred ritual allowed Hebrew families to maintain social cohesion, protect vulnerable members, and pass down cultural and moral traditions across generations, illustrating that marriage in this context was far more than a private arrangement. It was a public, spiritual, and enduring commitment that shaped both personal destinies and the broader cultural landscape. In the world of the ancient Celts, marriage was never reduced to a mere legal contract or a single family's private affair. It was instead woven into the living fabric of the tribe, the land, and the rhythms of the natural world, embodying a philosophy that saw human unions not simply as social arrangements, but as sacred acts of balance and continuity. The Celts, who held a profound reverence for the cycles of the seasons, the turning of the year, and the eternal dance between life and death, infused their marriage traditions with symbolism that echoed this cosmic order, showing that each union resonated not only within the household, but also across the community and even within the spiritual realm. Ceremonies often coincided with festivals such as Beltane, celebrated in spring when fertility, renewal, and growth were at their height, marking the beginning of a union with the blessing of the earth itself, or Samhain, the threshold between light and darkness, where vows might be seen as bridges across the mysteries of time and fate. Rituals were communal, involving not just the couple, but the entire tribe, affirming that marriage was not merely about the merging of two individuals, but also about reinforcing alliances, securing lineage, and maintaining harmony between families and clans. Fire, a symbol of purification and transformation, frequently played a central role, with couples walking around or even leaping across flames to signify their courage, unity, and shared destiny, while oaths were spoken under the watchful presence of elders, druids, and kin, who bore witness and guaranteed the legitimacy of the bond. Unlike more rigid cultures, where marriages were bound by unyielding laws, Celtic traditions allowed for flexibility and personal choice, acknowledging that unions could adapt, dissolve, or be renewed as life's circumstances shifted, reflecting an understanding of marriage as a living contract, as changeable and resilient as the land they inhabited. Within this system, balance was everything. Loyalty to one's partner was matched by loyalty to the tribe. Affection was tempered by responsibility, and personal choice was harmonized with communal expectations. A husband and wife were not simply bound to each other, but were entrusted with upholding the sacred balance between family, tribe, and nature itself, a responsibility that extended beyond their lifetimes. Since fidelity and allegiance were seen as promises to ancestors and descendants alike, through these rituals and practices, Celtic marriages became powerful symbols of connection, uniting personal love with collective duty, individual desire with cosmic balance, and in doing so, they carved a unique place in the history of human unions. One where freedom and responsibility were not opposites, but partners in the same enduring dance. The story of the Teutonic Order begins not in the frozen landscapes of northern Europe, but under the blazing sun of the Holy Land during the chaos of the Third Crusade, when countless pilgrims, soldiers, and settlers poured into a region racked by war and longing for stability. At first, their mission was humble and compassionate. They were German knights and brothers who devoted themselves to caring for the sick and wounded, offering respite to crusaders far from home, binding wounds, feeding the hungry, and providing a glimmer of sanctuary amidst the turmoil of battlefields and besieged cities. Yet, as so often happens in the history of institutions born of faith, their role began to shift with the tides of power, evolving from a charitable brotherhood into a disciplined military order, one that fused the devotion of monks with the martial rigor of knights. Over time, the Teutonic Order grew not only in numbers, but in ambition. No longer satisfied with offering care, but compelled by a vision of territorial dominion and spiritual conquest. Their discipline, their organization, and their unity allowed them to carve out influence well beyond the walls of their original hospitals, transforming them into a force both feared and respected across Europe. They established strongholds, commanded armies, and began to view themselves not merely as servants of God, but as defenders of Christendom. Men whose vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience coexisted uneasily with the demands of governance, taxation, and military rule. In their hands, the cross was not only a symbol of faith, but also an emblem of authority, one carried on banners into battlefields and planted upon the ramparts of newly seized lands. It was from this dual identity, half monastery, half army, that the vision of Malberg Castle arose. A fortress not built of fragile stone quarried from nearby hills, but of enduring red brick. A bold and almost defiant choice that marked it as different from the castles of France or England. Rising from the flatlands of the Vistula Delta, Malberg was not merely a defensive structure. It was a proclamation of permanence, a statement that the Teutonic Knights had come not as temporary crusaders, but as rulers, determined to impose their will upon the landscape and the people who inhabited it. Within its walls, chapels echoed with prayers, while armories bristled with weapons. Monastic chants mingled with the clash of steel, and the rhythms of devotion were inseparable from the demands of power. Thus, in the story of the Teutonic Order and their monumental stronghold, we see the transformation of an institution that began with compassion and faith, but soon expanded into ambition, empire, and the unyielding red walls of one of the greatest castles Europe would ever know. Standing upon the flat plains of northern Europe, Malberg Castle rose not merely as a fortress, but as a statement of both earthly and spiritual power, a place where the secular and the sacred were deliberately intertwined. Unlike the gray, weathered stone castles that dotted the landscapes of England or France, Malberg was constructed almost entirely of red brick, an audacious departure from tradition that gave it a unique, striking presence against the horizon. The choice was not merely practical, though brick was more abundant in the region than quarried stone. It was also symbolic, for the durability of brick spoke of permanence, of a structure meant to endure centuries of both faith and conflict, a visual reminder that the Teutonic Knights intended to remain and impose order upon the lands they governed. Within these massive walls, the dual purpose of the castle was carefully balanced, for it was not only a stronghold designed to repel enemies, but also a house of devotion. It's a place where rituals and prayer were woven into the daily life of its inhabitants. At its heart, chapels and cloisters provided spaces of solemn reflection, where candlelight flickered across vaulted ceilings and chants echoed softly in the air, reminding the knights of their vows and of the sacred calling that justified their earthly authority. Yet only a few steps away, the atmosphere shifted dramatically, as armories and training grounds prepared men for the harsh realities of battle. The prayers soon followed by the clash of weapons and the disciplined drills that forged them into a formidable military force. The castle as design reflected this duality. Its towers and walls were engineered to withstand siege and invasion, while its inner courtyards and chambers offered the contemplative rhythm of monastic life, where devotion and discipline reinforced one another in a seamless cycle. Every arch, corridor, and courtyard served as a constant reminder that the Teutonic Knights were not simply rulers, but guardians of both land and spirit. Men tasked with defending the faith through both contemplation and combat. In Malberg Castle, then, one encounters a rare fusion of purposes. A fortress that was never only about brick and mortar or defense and dominance, but a living monument to an order that sought to embody the sword and the cross within the same walls, making it one of the most extraordinary constructions of its age. From within the formidable walls of Malberg Castle, the Teutonic Order orchestrated a system of governance that was as intricate as it was powerful, functioning in many ways like a unique blend of monarchy and corporation, combining the sacred duties of a religious brotherhood with the worldly demands of territorial administration and economic control. The Grand Master, seated at the apex of authority, presided much like a king. Yet, his rule was legitimized not by hereditary bloodlines, but by the vows and traditions of the order, binding him to a council of knights who themselves acted less like courtiers and more like disciplined shareholders in a vast enterprise. Every knight held responsibility not merely for military defense, but also for the careful stewardship of lands, estates, and communities that fell under the order's dominion, creating a network of interdependence that stretched across regions and ensured that faith, discipline, and governance were always entwined. The scope of their power extended beyond the battlefield, reaching into the arteries of trade and commerce that flowed through the Baltic. The order taxed merchants, secured vital trade routes, and maintained ports that funneled grain, amber, and timber to the wider markets of Europe, ensuring both prosperity and control. Each estate under their jurisdiction functioned like a cog in a vast and meticulously managed machine, producing food, raw materials, and wealth that sustained the order's dual identity as both warriors and monks. Even their religious obligations were bound up with this system. 4 monasteries and chapels became centers of record-keeping, administration, and moral oversight, their prayers echoing alongside the tallying of accounts and the negotiation of treaties. In this way, the Teutonic Order blurred the line between piety and pragmatism, weaving together a structure in which devotion to God was expressed not only through solemn vows and spiritual contemplation, but also through the efficient almost corporate-like governance of resources, people, and power. Holmberg Castle was more than a fortress, and more than a monastery. It was the headquarters of a vast organization that looked simultaneously like a kingdom, corporation, and a church, embodying the ambition of men who believed their mission extended as much into the earthly realm as into the heavenly one. Yet even the strongest walls could not shield the Teutonic Order from the shifting tides of politics. And by the late 14th century, the foundation of their authority began to tremble beneath them. For decades, they had justified their wars and conquests by cloaking them in the mantle of holy duty, portraying themselves as the chosen defenders of Christianity against the pagan peoples of the Baltic. But in 1386, a momentous event altered the entire balance of power: the union of Lithuania and Poland. Grand Duke Jagala of Lithuania accepted baptism, married Queen Jadwiga of Poland, and ascended the Polish throne as King Władysław II Jagiellon, creating a vast and formidable Christian state that stretched across Eastern Europe. In that single act, the order as most enduring justification for crusade, the claim that they were waging war against pagans was suddenly and irreversibly undermined. For the Lithuanians were no longer a pagan adversary, but newly converted allies of Christendom. This union was more than a marriage of crowns. It was the forging of a political and military alliance that directly challenged the very identity and authority of the Teutonic Knights. Where once they had stood unopposed as the bulwark of faith along the frontier, they now found themselves cast into a more ambiguous role, their campaigns harder to justify, their image as holy warriors increasingly questioned both within and beyond their territories. Merchants, kings, and church leaders began to view their actions with growing skepticism, wondering whether the order's pursuits were truly guided by religious devotion or driven instead by the thirst for land, wealth, and power. In effect, the conversion of Lithuania exposed the order's dual nature: part monastery, part empire, placed them in a dangerous position, forced to reconcile their claims to divine mission with a new political reality in which their enemies were no longer pagans but fellow Christians, for Malberg Castle and the knights within its walls. This was a turning point. The fortress still stood in all its magnificence, and the order still commanded vast estates and armies. But the spiritual clarity that had once underpinned their authority was slipping away. In its place arose a growing unease, for without the sacred justification of crusade, their conflicts threatened to appear as naked struggles for dominance. And in a Europe that was increasingly skeptical of unchecked power, such ambitions would not go unchallenged. As the political landscape turned against them, the Teutonic Order soon discovered that their troubles did not end on the battlefield. For within their own territories, another struggle was unfolding. One fought not with swords and lances, but with coin, contracts, and the mounting frustrations of those who lived beneath their rule. The grand fortresses and shining ceremonies that had once symbolized the strength and sanctity of the order came at a staggering cost, and the defeats they suffered at the hands of the polished Lithuanian alliance only deepened the financial strain. Armies had to be raised, mercenaries hired, and fortifications repaired, each endeavor draining the coffers until debts piled higher than the very walls of Malberg itself. To sustain their ambitions and maintain their grip on power, the knights turned increasingly to taxation, demanding ever greater contributions from the merchants, peasants, and townsfolk who depended on the order for stability and protection. At first, these levies may have been tolerated as the price of safety, but as years passed and the demands grew heavier, resentment began to fester in the hearts of the people. Markets that had once thrived under the protection of the knights now found themselves burdened by tariffs that stifled trade, while farmers who had long tilled the land with loyalty now struggled under the weight of levies that left them little to feed their own families. The very subjects whose labor and resources had sustained the order for generations began to question whether their rulers still served a divine mission or merely their own survival. In the taverns of towns, whispers turned to grumblings, and grumblings to open dissatisfaction, for the shining image of the knights as holy guardians was tarnished by the harsher reality of debt, bureaucracy, and greed. Even within the order's own ranks, discontent brewed. Younger knights, raised on tales of crusading glory, found themselves instead entangled in endless accounting and disputes over taxation, their lives consumed more by ledgers than by the clash of arms. The dissonance between the ideals of their vows and the realities of governance weakened the very cohesion of the brotherhood, and the once seamless unity of prayer and discipline gave way to factions, debates, and quiet disillusionment. The fortress of Malberg still loomed proudly over the landscape, but beneath its brick walls lay a society increasingly strained, where loyalty could no longer be taken for granted, and where the seeds of unrest hinted at storms yet to come. By the time the 17th century dawned, the thunder of war that had once echoed through Malborg's walls had quieted, and with that silence came gradual transformation that reshaped the great fortress from a bastion of knights into something altogether different. The age of crusades and border wars had long since passed, and with the evolution of gunpowder weaponry and shifting political alliances, castles that once seemed unassailable lost much of their military relevance. Malberg, though still impressive in scale and majesty, no longer stood as the front-line bulwark of faith and power, but instead entered the quieter phase of existence, its mighty walls and echoing halls repurposed to meet the needs of more practical times. Granaries filled chambers where knights had once dined. Vaulted rooms that had resounded with prayer and debate were stacked with goods. And courtyards that had hosted grand ceremonies became the stage for the more mundane rhythms of administration and storage. The fortress, once alive with the ritual of the sword and the cross, settled into the role of a vast warehouse and bureaucratic center, still essential in function, but stripped of the aura of divine mission that had first justified its construction. Yet, even as its martial and spiritual grandeur waned, Malberg Castle began to assume a new significance, one that would secure its place in the imagination of future generations. Travelers and scholars who passed through its gates could not help but marvel at its scale and artistry for the sweeping red brick walls, the intricate Gothic detailing, and the sheer ambition of its design still radiated a sense of wonder long after the knights themselves had faded into memory. Over time, as Europe entered an age more preoccupied with heritage and the preservation of the past, Malberg was no longer merely a utilitarian storehouse, but became a monument to a vanished order and an architectural relic that demanded care. Artists and historians took interest in its soaring arches and austere cloisters, while restorers, inspired by the romantic fascination with medieval grandeur, sought to revive the spirit of the place through careful preservation and imaginative reconstruction. In this way, the fortress was reborn, no longer a seat of power, but a stage upon which history itself was curated, interpreted, and presented as a testament to the ambitions, contradictions, and artistry of the medieval world. Thus, by the 17th century and beyond, Malberg had traveled full circle from sacred fortress to administrative depot, from seat of power to symbol of minarets, bricks, and towers, no longer shaping the destiny of nations, but instead preserving the story of an age when men believed they could unite sword and faith within the walls of a single, monumental stronghold. For those who set their eyes westward, lured by the promise of fertile land, open skies, and the hope of shaping a new destiny, the journey into the frontier was never as simple as packing one's belongings and stepping into an untouched paradise. Instead, it was a crucible of endurance that tested every ounce of strength, patience, and resolve. Families who loaded their wagons and set out along the great trails, the Oregon Trail stretching across prairies and mountains, or the Santa Fe Trail winding through deserts and rugged passes, were not merely travelers, but pioneers venturing into a landscape that could be both breathtakingly beautiful and mercilessly hostile. The sheer distances alone were daunting, requiring months of steady movement, with wagon wheels creaking and oxen straining as mile after mile of wilderness unfolded before them, each new horizon offering both hope and uncertainty. The environment they entered did not yield its secrets easily. Weather, in particular, was an unpredictable adversary, capable of turning a seemingly calm journey into a desperate struggle for survival. Blistering summer heat could parch throats and crack the earth beneath their feet, while sudden thunderstorms transformed dusty paths into rivers of mud that swallowed wheels and delayed progress for days. When winter came, the cold was a silent killer, its icy winds cutting through worn clothing and leaving settlers huddled around scarce fires, praying that their supplies of food and fuel would last until spring. Wildlife, too, played its part in the drama of frontier life, for while the vast herds of bisons symbolized abundance and opportunity, other creatures, wolves, circling campsites under cover of darkness, bears prowling in the forest, or venomous snakes hidden among the grasses reminded settlers that the wilderness was a realm where human beings were not the undisputed masters. Each day was a test of grit, demanding that men, women, and even children adapt quickly to challenges that might have seemed insurmountable back in the towns and farms they had left behind. Wheels broke, rivers had to be crossed with wagons floating precariously on makeshift rafts, and sickness often crept silently through camps, claiming the weak and weary. Yet, through every hardship, the settlers pressed forward, driven by the vision of a better future that lay just beyond the horizon. In the end, it was not just a journey across miles of unforgiving terrain, but a passage through trial and transformation, forging communities whose survival depended as much on courage and cooperation as on individual endurance. When at last the weary travelers arrived at the patch of land they dared to call their own, the dream of settlement quickly revealed itself to be less about comfort and more about survival. For the frontier was not a place that welcomed leisure or luxury. The first and most urgent task was shelter, and so men and women, often with little more than axes, saws, and determination, set about raising cabins from the trees that stood around them. These homes were humble in every sense, often no larger than a single room. Their walls made of rough-hewn logs notched together, and their roofs covered with shingles or sod, designed less to impress the eye than to hold back the rain, the snow, and the biting wind. Inside, there was little in the way of furnishings, perhaps a rough table, a few stools, a straw mattress spread on the floor, and a hearth where fires burned day and night to keep away the cold. Every object was chosen for its utility. Every corner served multiple purposes. For in such a place, survival depended on efficiency rather than beauty. These cabins were not merely houses, but fortresses against the elements. Their walls sometimes chinked with mud or clay to keep out drafts. Their floors of packed earth that reminded families each day of their closeness to the land they labored upon. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. Parents, children, and sometimes extended family members all shared the same cramped space, their lives overlapping in the steady rhythm of daily chores. A single room might serve as kitchen, dining hall, bedroom, and even workshop, each function shifting with the needs of the hour. And in this constant improvisation, families developed resilience and resourcefulness that became as vital as food and firewood. Outside, smoke curled into the sky, signaling to any who passed by that a new household had carved its place into the wilderness, while within, the crackle of the hearth and the low murmur of voices told of human determination to endure in a land that often seemed intent on testing them. Though modest to the point of austerity, these cabins carried immense meaning, for they marked the settlers' first claim to permanence in a world of endless uncertainty. Every log laid, every nail driven, and every stone placed in the hearth was a declaration of intent that despite the hardships, despite the loneliness, despite the daily struggle for survival, the family who lived there had chosen to root themselves in the soil of the frontier, staking not only their labor, but their very hopes for the future upon its unforgiving ground. Life inside those cabins and on the rugged land surrounding them demanded an endless cycle of labor. And unlike in more settled towns where childhood might have allowed for games and learning, on the frontier, every pair of hands, no matter how small, was pressed into service for the sake of survival. From dawn until the fading light of evening, families lived by the rhythm of necessity, each task not only vital but often shared across generations, with parents teaching children through doing, and children in turn carrying responsibilities that far exceeded their years. Boys, often scarcely more than children themselves, took up rifles or bows and followed their fathers into the forests or across the plains, learning the art of hunting with a seriousness that came not from sport, but from the knowledge that the success of their aim might mean the difference between a full table and an empty stomach. They also tended to livestock, feeding chickens, herding cattle, watching over the stubborn pigs that rooted in the mud, knowing that every animal was a precious investment whose loss could spell disaster for the family's survival. Girls, on the other hand, shouldered responsibilities just as essential, their days often beginning in the dim glow of morning as they stoked the fires and prepared the simplest of meals from what little supplies were on hand. They learned to coax life from the soil in small gardens, planting beans, corn, and squash, bending over the earth alongside their mothers with patience born of necessity. When harvest time came, their work was far from over, for every vegetable had to be carefully preserved through drying, salting, or pickling, ensuring that the family had sustenance to carry them through the lean, unforgiving months of winter. Within the cabin, girls took on the work of mending clothes, boiling water, and stirring pots that never seemed to rest, their young hands already marked with the roughness of labor that left little space for the innocence of childhood. Even the youngest children found ways to contribute, gathering firewood, carrying water, or watching over the smallest of animals, their games often indistinguishable from chores, and their laughter woven into the backdrop of daily toil. In truth, the survival of a frontier family was less about the strength of one individual and more about the collective will of all, each person's effort a thread in the fabric of endurance that bound them together. Through this shared hardship, bonds were forged not only between parent and child, but among siblings who grew up less as playmates and more as comrades, united in a common struggle against the wilderness. In such a world, maturity came quickly, responsibilities weighed heavily, and survival itself became a lesson written into every task, every gesture, and every passing day. As the seasons shifted and the vibrant warmth of summer began to fade, frontier families turned their attention to one of the most vital aspects of survival, ensuring that their hard-won food would last through the long, merciless months of winter, when snow blanketed the land and hunting became treacherous, and every morsel of sustenance carried the weight of life itself. Preservation was both art and science. It's passed down from parent to child through hands-on labor, experimentation, and a profound respect for the rhythms of nature. Meats, freshly hunted from deer, elk, or small game, were painstakingly prepared through smoking or salting. The rich, smoky aroma of curing flesh filling cabins and outbuildings alike, signaling both diligence and the promise of nourishment in times when the earth itself seemed frozen and unyielding. Salting required care, for too little would allow spoilage. Too much would render the meat inedible, and the balance was often learned only through years of trial, error, and observation. Vegetables, too, required ingenuity to survive the months when the garden lay buried beneath snow. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, and other root crops were dug from the earth, cleaned, and packed into straw-lined cellars or barrels, where insulation against cold and moisture preserved their vitality for weeks and sometimes months. Pickling became a ritual of both patience and precision, as cucumbers, cabbage, and beets were submerged in brine infused with herbs and spices, each jar a small miracle of survival, its acidic tang promising sustenance when fresh food was no longer available. Families worked in unison during harvest time, stripping fields and gardens bare, knowing that every preserved item might be the difference between plenty and hunger. When winter winds howled through the sparse frontier landscape, smokehouses became centers of constant activity, their heat and aromatic plumes a testament to tireless effort and foresight, while pantry shelves, packed with rows of carefully labeled jars, were a quiet reassurance that the months ahead could be endured with dignity and resilience. In this way, food preservation on the frontier was never simply a domestic chore, but a defining element of daily life, requiring foresight, skill, and unwavering commitment. Each jar, each barrel, each bundle of smoked meat carried not only nutrition, but also the weight of labor, knowledge, and survival instinct. A tangible connection between human effort and the untamed wilderness that demanded respect and endurance. Through these techniques, families could face winter's harshest trials with confidence, knowing that even as the world outside turned icy and unforgiving, the fruits of their labor would provide warmth, energy, and the quiet reassurance that life, though fragile, could be sustained against the odds. At the heart of every frontier cabin, both literally and figuratively, stood the hearth, a flickering, ever-present source of life, warmth, and structure amid the harsh unpredictability of the wilderness. It was here that the raw elements of the world, cold winds, biting snow, and long, dark nights were held at bay by the steady crackle of fire and the careful attention of those who tended it. For the hearth was never merely a tool for cooking. It was the pulse of the household, the anchor around which daily life revolved. Morning light often found children crouched beside it, hands stretched toward the comforting heat as they prepared for the tasks ahead, while mothers stirred thick stews or boiled water for tea, imparting both nourishment and the subtle lessons of patience and care that came with tending fire. Fathers and older sons would return from the fields, forests, or pastures, their chilled hands thawed by the warmth, their spirits lifted by the familiar glow that symbolized not just comfort, but home itself. The hearth's influence extended far beyond its practical functions. Meals were more than sustenance. They were moments of shared stories, plans, and laughter that wove the fabric of family cohesion. In its glow, lessons about survival, morality, and the skills needed to thrive in such an unforgiving land were passed from one generation to the next, often with the rhythm of the fire echoing the rhythm of life itself. Children learned to listen, to observe, and to absorb the unspoken knowledge carried in the gestures and movements of their elders as they tended the flames, added kindling, or rotated pots above the embers, discovering the delicate balance between too little heat and too much, between vigilance and trust. Evenings often found the family gathered closely, warmth drawing them into conversation, the soft murmur of voices blending with the crackle and hiss of burning wood, creating a sense of continuity and sanctuary that contrasted sharply with the wilderness that stretched beyond the cabin walls. The hearth was also a marker of ingenuity and resourcefulness. Firewood had to be chopped, stacked, and rationed carefully. Embers had to be preserved overnight to ensure that a spark remained ready for the next day's work, in a land where a single misstep could lead to frostbite, hunger, or illness. Mastery over the fire represented a fragile but vital victory over the chaos of the frontier. Beyond the tangible benefits of cooking and warmth, the hearth embodied the intangible qualities that allow families to endure resilience, cooperation, and a quiet dignity of sustaining life through shared effort. It became a symbol of the home itself, a beacon of safety, order, and belonging that remained steadfast even as storms raged outside and the wilderness threatened to encroach. In the dance of flames and shadow, families found not only physical sustenance, but also the emotional and social glue that held them together. A reminder that in the most challenging circumstances, survival was inseparable from the bonds forged around the fire. Despite the relentless demands of daily survival on the frontier, families understood that the spark of knowledge, however modest, is essential not only for individual growth, but for the long-term resilience of the community itself. And so, education, though limited and often rudimentary, is highly valued and carefully cultivated whenever opportunity allowed. One-room schoolhouses, little more than rough-hewn cabins equipped with a slate, a few tattered textbooks, and the watchful guidance of a local teacher, became centers of quiet hope amid the unyielding wilderness, offering children the chance to learn to read, write, and perform basic arithmetic while also absorbing lessons in moral conduct, history, and the natural world around them. These gatherings were seldom large, yet they carried immense significance. For the frontier had few luxuries, and each session of learning represented both a reprieve from the relentless labor of daily life and a bridge to a broader world beyond the immediate hardships of snow, wind, and toil. Community events, whether seasonal celebrations, harvest festivals, or informal gatherings at neighbors' cabins, supplemented formal instruction by providing opportunities for social interaction and the exchange of knowledge. children and adults alike would participate, sharing stories, songs, and practical skills, from planting techniques to hunting strategies, while also reinforcing the bonds that enabled collective survival. For the frontier family, education was as much about learning to navigate the social landscape as it was about academic instruction, teaching the value of cooperation, mutual aid, and the subtle arts of negotiation and empathy that ensured that no household faced the wilderness entirely alone. In these moments of learning and communal engagement, the children observed and absorbed the rhythms of the land and the wisdom of experience, while parents and elders imparted knowledge not only through words, but through demonstration, Geisha, and the careful passing down of skills honed over years of relentless effort. Even amid scarcity and hardship, the frontier's small hubs of education and social interaction became pillars of resilience, creating a sense of identity, continuity, and hope that transcended mere survival. Through shared learning, storytelling, and communal rituals, families and neighbors forged a network of interdependence, ensuring that knowledge, skills, and culture endured alongside the practical necessities of food, shelter, and fire. In essence, the frontier's approach to education and community reflected a profound understanding that the survival of a people depended not just on physical endurance, but on the cultivation of wisdom, social cohesion, and the enduring human capacity to learn, adapt, and grow, even in the harshest of environments. Survival on the frontier demanded not only grit and endurance, but also an openness to learning from the people and environments that had long thrived there. And as settlers pushed deeper into uncharted lands, they quickly realized that the knowledge embedded in indigenous practices could mean the difference between life and death, transforming how they farmed, healed, and interacted with the natural world around them. In many cases, European settlers, accustomed to familiar methods, ill-suited to the often harsh climates and unfamiliar soils of the American wilderness, found themselves humbled by the ingenuity and adaptability of Native American techniques, which had been refined over generations in harmony with the land. They learned to cultivate crops like maize, beans, and squash, using the companion planting methods that maximized yield while preserving soil fertility. An approach that seemed almost miraculous to those whose experience with rigid monocultures had produced meager results. Medicine, too, became a field of collaboration and adaptation, as settlers observed and adopted indigenous remedies made from local herbs, roots, and bark, learning to treat common ailments, wounds, and infections without access to the doctors, pharmacies, or equipment of more settled regions. Mothers taught children the identification of useful plants, the preparation of poultices and teas, and the careful measurement and combination of natural ingredients, passing down a body of practical knowledge that blended European traditions with native wisdom, resulting in a hybrid approach uniquely suited to the frontier environment. The lessons extended beyond agriculture and medicine. Settlers also absorbed guidance on navigating the land, understanding seasonal cycles, predicting weather patterns, and reading the subtle signs of wildlife behavior, all skills that improved hunting, foraging, and survival. This cultural exchange was not merely pragmatic, reshaped the social and intellectual landscape of frontier life, fostering a spirit of curiosity, respect, and adaptability that became embedded in the identity of these communities. By embracing knowledge from indigenous populations, settlers created a living curriculum of survival, one that combined inherited European customs with a nuanced understanding of a landscape that had been lived in and studied for centuries. In doing so, they cultivated not just the physical means to endure, but also a mental and cultural resilience that allowed them to navigate uncertainty with ingenuity and foresight, learning to respect the rhythms of the land and the expertise of those who had mastered it long before their arrival. In the relentless expanse of the frontier, where danger lurked in the forests, the rivers, and the biting cold, it was often the women who served as the invisible backbone of survival, orchestrating the delicate balance between daily labor, household management, and the preservation of family cohesion with a level of resilience, resourcefulness, and practical intelligence that was nothing short of extraordinary. While the men ventured into the wilds to hunt, chop wood, or defend homesteads from unforeseen threats, women remained the steadfast anchors of domestic life, transforming humble cabins into organized, functional spaces where every corner, every tool, and every supply had its purpose, ensuring that survival was not left to chance, but meticulously managed through careful planning and tireless effort. They were the organizers, the strategists, and the problem solvers, constantly adapting to the changing seasons, anticipating shortages, and finding innovative ways to stretch meager supplies into sufficient nourishment for the family, whether through preserving food with smoking, salting, or pickling, weaving and mending clothing, or crafting essential household items from limited resources. Yet their contributions extended far beyond the practical. Frontier women also nurtured the emotional and moral fabric of their households, providing guidance, discipline, and encouragement to children, whose lives were shaped by constant labor and exposure to the unpredictability of frontier existence. It taught not only the necessary skills for survival spinning, cooking, gardening, animal care, and medicinal knowledge, but also the values of patience, perseverance, and communal cooperation, instilling a sense of identity and continuity that allowed families to endure both the physical and psychological challenges of isolation and hardship. In evenings warmed by the hearth's glow, these women became teachers, storytellers, and mediators, sharing tales that preserved history, conveyed wisdom, and strengthened the social bonds that were as essential to survival as firewood or preserved meat. Moreover, frontier women often served as unofficial leaders within their broader communities, connecting neighbors, exchanging knowledge, coordinating cooperative efforts such as barn raisings, shared harvests, or communal childcare, creating networks of interdependence that amplified each family's capacity to thrive in an environment that offered few guarantees. Their ingenuity extended to medical care, where they would blend indigenous knowledge with European traditions, crafting herbal remedies and treatments that could save lives when professional help was impossibly distant. In every action, whether tending a sick child, negotiating trade, or rationing supplies during a harsh winter, these women demonstrated a profound intelligence, born not of formal schooling, but of necessity, observation, and experiential learning, embodying a form of leadership that was subtle yet essential, decisive yet grounded in collaboration, and always oriented towards sustaining life and legacy amid the unforgiving realities of the frontier. The experiences, struggles, and triumphs of those who carved out lives on the frontier left an indelible imprint not only on the families who endured the harsh realities of isolated wilderness, but also on a broader cultural psyche, establishing values and ideals that would echo across generations and become central to the American identity, woven into the very fabric of what would later be celebrated as the American dream. Life on the frontier demanded an extraordinary level of self-reliance, compelling individuals to trust in their own hands, minds, and judgment to overcome challenges ranging from unpredictable weather and scarce resources to encounters with wild animals and a treacherous terrain of untamed lands. And in doing so, settlers developed a resilience and confidence that became both practical and symbolic, a testament to the human capacity for endurance and adaptation under extreme conditions. Perseverance was not simply a virtue, but a necessary mode of existence, as day after day, season after season, families labored with unwavering commitment, planting crops in unyielding soil, tending to livestock in bitter cold, mending tools and clothing with meticulous care, and ensuring that the hearth, the literal and figurative center of the home, remained alive and sustaining despite the hardships outside, fostering a tenacity that defined not only their survival, but also their identity. Innovation emerged as another cornerstone of frontier life, born from the pressing need to transform limited resources into functional solutions. Whether through constructing multifunctional cabins from raw timber, devising ingenious food preservation techniques to survive long winters, or blending European practices with indigenous knowledge to optimize agriculture, medicine, and navigation of the land. These acts of creativity were never abstract. They were immediately practical, directly impacting the safety, sustenance, stability of families and communities, and yet they also fostered a mindset of problem-solving and adaptability that would influence generations, shaping attitudes toward work, self-improvement, and communal responsibility. Became beyond the individual and familial sphere. The frontier experience cultivated a culture of shared knowledge and cooperation as neighbors assisted one another in building homes, raising crops, or preparing for harsh seasons, creating a social fabric that combined independence with interdependence, teaching that survival and success required both personal initiative and collective effort. Over time, the lessons learned on the frontier, self-reliance, perseverance, and innovation transcended mere survival strategies to become defining cultural ideals, influencing economic ambition, political thought, and social values throughout American history. The rugged determination of early settlers became a narrative touchstone, romanticized in folklore, literature, and national consciousness, symbolizing the belief that with hard work, ingenuity, and moral fortitude, individuals could carve out opportunity from even the most challenging circumstances. The legacy of the frontier thus endured far beyond the immediate hardships of the wilderness, embedding a philosophy that celebrated human resilience, ingenuity, and the pursuit of freedom, forming a foundation upon which generations would build, shaping not only the development of the nation, but also the enduring concept of the American dream as a promise of possibility, self-determination, and the transformative power of perseverance against all odds. The experiences of early settlers serve as a vivid testament to the extraordinary intersection of human ingenuity, endurance, and adaptability, revealing how individuals and families confronted not only the unpredictable forces of nature, but also the complex social landscapes of frontier life with a combination of creativity, resilience, and strategic thinking that was both immediate and transformative, shaping their communities and leaving a lasting imprint on the cultural identity of the emerging nation. Every action taken on the frontier, whether clearing dense forests to make arable land, constructing shelters from rough-hewn timber and stone that could withstand fierce storms, or rationing supplies to stretch scarce food through unforgiving winters, reflected a meticulous negotiation with the environment, a constant exercise in problem-solving that required both foresight and improvisation. Settlers were not merely reacting to circumstance, they were actively inventing solutions to unprecedented challenges, blending inherited European methods with knowledge gleaned from indigenous neighbors, observing patterns in wildlife and weather, and experimenting with crops, preservation techniques, and construction practices, all while simultaneously maintaining the social and emotional cohesion of their families and local communities, which depended upon cooperation, trust, and mutual assistance as much as individual skill and perseverance. This blend of ingenuity and endurance also extended into the social fabric of frontier settlements, where settlers had to navigate relationships with diverse groups of people, including other settlers, indigenous communities, Ks, and increasingly organized local authorities, often negotiating cultural differences, trade agreements, and shared labor arrangements that required diplomacy, tact, and adaptability. In these interactions, the ability to read subtle cues, anticipate challenges, and respond with practical yet socially acceptable solutions became as critical as the ability to hunt game or repair a leaky roof, highlighting how survival on the frontier was as much a test of intellectual and emotional acuity as it was of physical stamina. Through these intertwined challenges, environmental, social, and logistical settlers cultivated a mindset that prized observation, critical thinking, resourcefulness, and resilience. transforming everyday survival into a sophisticated practice of human ingenuity, where each decision, each adjustment, and each learned skill contributed not only to immediate well-being, but also to the long-term adaptability and prosperity of their families and communities. So ultimately, the story of early settlers illustrates how human beings, when faced with extreme adversity, can draw upon creativity, perseverance, and collaborative intelligence to not only endure, but to thrive, leaving a legacy that demonstrates the enduring power of adaptability. It's the transformative potential of practical knowledge, in the remarkable ways in which individuals shape both their environments and their societies in response to the challenges they encounter. A lesson that resonates far beyond the rugged landscapes of the frontier and continues to inspire reflection on the capacity of human beings to innovate, endure, and build meaningful lives even in the most demanding circumstances. As we draw the story of the geisha to its contemplative close, it becomes clear that the life of these women was an intricate tapestry woven from threads of discipline, artistry, emotional intelligence, cultural legacy, a combination so profound that its impact resonates long after the final performance and the public lights have dimmed. In the very earliest moments of their lives, girls born into a path toward the Okiya were set on a trajectory that demanded extraordinary resilience and commitment. They were entrusted with the immense responsibility of mastering not only the tangible arts of dance, music, and tea ceremony, but also the intangible skills of observation, subtle influence, and the graceful navigation of social dynamics, all under the watchful eyes of mentors who demanded precision and unwavering focus at every step. Each day of their training was both physically taxing and mentally exacting, involving long hours in formal seated positions, careful maintenance of elaborate hairstyles like the nihongami, the meticulous wearing of layered kimonos that tested flexibility and endurance, a practice that transformed ordinary movements into performances of elegance and control, while simultaneously cultivating a patience and self-discipline that would define the geisha's public persona and internal poise for a lifetime. Beyond the physical rigor, the emotional labor undertaken by geisha was equally extraordinary. They learned to manage interactions with clients of varying temperaments, to redirect conversations with subtlety, and to maintain an unbroken composure even in moments of discomfort or unpredictability. A skill set that required acute awareness of human behavior, the strategic deployment of silence, and the art of deflecting attention without revealing vulnerability. This mastery of emotional nuance, paired with an education in poetry, music, dance, and ceremonial practices, allowed geisha to navigate the delicate balance between admiration and distance, projecting an aura of mystique that both captivated and maintained boundaries, showing that their influence endured not only during active service, but long into retirement as their techniques, gestures, and philosophy were transmitted to successive generations of apprentices. The life cycle of a geisha thus emerges as a testament to the harmonious integration of individual skill, cultural literacy, and strategic social influence, illustrating how discipline and artistry can coexist to create a legacy that transcends temporal boundaries and geographic limitations. In a broader cultural context, examining marriage and social customs across civilizations, from the legally structured unions of the Sumerians and Egyptians to the ceremonial intricacies of Japanese and Spartan traditions, and from the socially and legally flexible arrangements of Roman women to the symbolic, seasonal, communal rituals of Celtic societies, highlights the universal human endeavor to negotiate relationships, obligations, and social cohesion within the frameworks of law, religion, and cultural expectation. These historical practices reveal that across time and place, communities sought to balance individual agency with societal duty, employing rituals, contracts, and symbolic acts to stabilize social structures while allowing room for personal expression, affection, and strategic navigation of interpersonal dynamics. Just as the geisha mastered the art of balancing admiration with restraint. So too did ancient societies cultivate systems that emphasized harmony, duty, and mutual respect, demonstrating that cultural sophistication and strategic thought are neither modern inventions nor limited to elite or ceremonial classes, but rather intrinsic to human adaptation and social evolution. Similarly, the fortifications and administrative strategies of the Teutonic Order, exemplified by Malbuck Castle, illustrate the interplay between religious motivation, military necessity, and political pragmatism, built with innovative brickwork to serve as both a defensive bastion and a place of worship. The castle's existence was emblematic of an organization operating at the intersection of monarchical authority and corporate administration, managing trade, estates, and religious duties with a complexity that mirrored the nuanced social and cultural structures of Geisha society and ancient marital traditions alike. Political upheavals, economic pressures, and shifting alliances eventually diminished the order's authority, transforming Malbuck from a military stronghold into a historical monument, a process that underscores the impermanence of human institutions and the enduring importance of cultural legacy. Transitioning to frontier life, the settlers who journeyed westward in pursuit of land, opportunity, and survival faced challenges as formidable as any performance or political maneuver, contending with extreme weather, perilous wildlife, and grueling treks along trails like the Oregon and Santa Fe routes. Their homes were simple, multifunctional cabins built to shelter rather than to comfort. At every family member contributed to survival. Boys hunted and tended livestock. Girls cooked, gardened, and preserved food through smoking, salting, and pickling, while the hearth remained the central anchor of domestic life, providing warmth, nourishment, and communal focus. Education was sparse but valued, and settlers often incorporated indigenous knowledge of agriculture and medicine, illustrating an adaptability and ingenuity that mirrored the meticulous training, observation, and learning of Geisha apprentices. Women, in particular, embodied resilience, resourcefulness, and intelligence, managing households and communities with a combination of practical skill and strategic foresight, showing not only the survival but the flourishing of their families amid hardship. Ultimately, the experiences of both Geisha and frontier settlers converge in their demonstration of human endurance, adaptability, and the capacity to create meaningful lives within demanding circumstances. Whether through disciplined artistry, cultural mastery, or practical ingenuity in the face of nature's challenges, these stories remind us that the legacies we inherit, be they artistic, social, or cultural, are shaped not only by the extraordinary achievements of individuals, but also by their ability to navigate, influence, and adapt to the world around them, leaving lessons for future generations about perseverance, strategy, and the profound impact of human dedication. In reflecting on these histories, we are reminded of the beauty, complexity, and resilience inherent in the human experience, and perhaps inspired to approach our own challenges with a similar blend of discipline, creativity, and empathy. So now, as the day draws to a close and the stories of distant lands, rigorous training, and unyielding perseverance settle in your mind, it's time to rest, letting these tales linger as a gentle companion into your dreams. And with that, good night. And may your sleep be as peaceful and restorative as the quiet moments after a long day of dedicated effort.